Hello and welcome to Rink Wide Toronto, sponsored by Bodog. I cannot tell you, this was a really difficult night of sleep for me. I was so excited to actually get back and announce that I'm hosting a brand new Leafs podcast, but I'm getting the pleasure of doing this first episode and many other with the legendary Paul Hendrick, who's been gracious enough to come out of, I guess it's semi-retirement, Paul. I'm not sure exactly what it is, but yeah, it's just, I cannot tell you. It's been 5 years for me since I've been in the audio space, was looking for the right people to get back into it with. Super thankful to Go Goat Sports and North Beach Agency for the opportunity, and Bodog, our presenting sponsor. Make a play at Canada's Choice for free casino games, sports odds, and poker strategies. Henny, welcome aboard. Thank you so much. How have you been?
Dave, thank you. And what a privilege it is to be working alongside you yet again. And a far cry from the days of scrumming, in the Leaf dressing room, whether it be practice or down former Air Canada Centre. And it's just great to be back talking hockey, which is a 12-month of the year discussion around these parts. And even if I've been retired, you never quite leave it. And especially when it comes to a hockey club as talented as this Maple Leaf club, with the potential that they've got to do. But it's a tall mountain to climb, but they're a lot higher up that mountain compared to a lot of the other teams in the NHL. So it's great to be a part of this. Thank you.
Yeah, and thank you. And you mentioned 12 months of the year. I felt like we got 12 months worth of storylines on day one of Leafs camp. This was media day, and there were a lot of stories to come from it, and we'll get to it in a second. But yeah, I want to stress, there's a lot of Leaf podcasts out there, but what we're going to do that's going to be different is, there's post-game shows. We're going to do one for all 82 games, in addition to the off days and the practices and the morning skates. But there's going to be one from someone, usually me, in the building for all 82 games. And I can promise you, you will not get that anywhere else. So I'm really excited for that. Let's get down to brass tacks, because that's what I'm all about. That's what a lot of Leaf fans really want to know. And Kyle Dubas, it came out a few days ago that he's entering the final year of his 5-year contract as GM of the Maple Leafs. Of course, he joined the organization in 2014 as an assistant general manager. I believe he was Brendan Shanahan's first hire in that regime. Remember when they were kind of changing everything around? I remember the date exactly. It was July 22nd, 2014, when Kyle Dubas entered the Leafs organization. Well, for the first time, it looks like his job is on the line. He's got to show some results going into this year. And, it was really interesting. I'm curious to see how he handles this, but judging by his comments today, and we'll throw to it now, he didn't seem like he was too stressed about the situation going in.
He obviously, Brendan and I talk all the time and have very open communication on it, and we met at the end of the summer and just kind of went through the way that the year was going to go, and frankly, that's what I expected. I expected the reality is I'm fully acknowledge we haven't gotten it done in the end of the season. So I would much rather be evaluated on the full term anyway. So we just had a conversation about it, and that was great. And I'm very happy to go through with how we're going through it.
Henny, what do you make of those comments? Obviously, he hasn't gotten past the playoffs, past the first round. The whole team hasn't for a long time, but in his tenure as GM, the last 4 seasons. So what do you make of that?
Well, I think he's confident in his position, and this is the year of bet on yourself. And Aaron Judge is a good example. It comes to mind immediately. If you have confidence in the pieces that are there, there's no rush. Get it done at the end of the season, and if they do fail, you're not going to be back anyway. But if they do succeed, and I think Kyle believes, and Brendan believes, that this team is going to be able to concede. They've been knocking on the door for the last few years, especially the last 2. I think they've got an opportunity now to knock it down. And with that will come contract extensions. Now, does this render Kyle a lame duck general manager? No, I don't think so. I think the engine, the car, everything is set up to go, and if all things are equal in terms of everyone and key players staying healthy, I think this team has an opportunity really to do some big things this season, and subsequently what will follow will be a contract extension. This is just self-confidence from the club you've got and confidence in himself and the job he's been able to do. Not everything's been perfect, but he's done a great job, I feel, in lining this team up and putting it into a position to succeed. Listen, David, they're one of 4 to maybe 6 clubs who I would consider at this point in time in mid-September to be a Stanley Cup contender. Then there's a next tier, but the Leafs are in that top tier. So I think Kyle's very confident of his position.
Well, that's interesting, and I debated this back and forth for a while because I've seen, last year Sheldon Keefe, he came into it with a 2-year extension, and a lot of people might have been surprised on that given the way the Leafs performed against the Montreal Canadiens in the 2021 playoffs. And, we've seen it in other clubs where contract extensions are given. And then because money is no object at MLSC, within weeks or months, see you later. The results aren't there and the move is made. And for that reason, I wasn't really surprised by this. I thought maybe there would have been a silent extension of at least an additional year as a symbolic one to take that tag. But, I don't necessarily think that anything has been earned. The regular season and points records are definitely an accomplishment, but they just haven't gotten the job done yet. And I do think it was a good job by Kyle Dubas, at least in that clip, to have some self-awareness about that he probably hasn't earned the right to just be evaluated on those 4 years when the team hasn't gotten over the hump. Okay, let's talk about another person in the organization who's also kind of, people are wondering about his future, although it's not for a while. And that's the star of the team, the undisputed number 1 star of the team, and that's Auston Matthews, who, the question was coming. And even though he's not eligible to sign a contract extension until July 1st, was pressed about what his future is with the Toronto Maple Leafs.
I appreciate the question. I'd like to be clear, about the contract stuff. I'm going to touch on it today, and I think that's it. I understand why I'm being asked, but at the same time, I'm focused on this season. I'm focused on obviously, winning and continuing to improve and help push this team over the edge. So, as far as that goes, I'm just focused on this season and what's to come in the future. Obviously, when that time comes, we'll deal with it. But I think I've been pretty clear. I've loved my time here. I really love playing in the city of Toronto. I think I consider it home now. So I've really enjoyed my time. My teammates have been incredible year after year. It's nice to have the support that this city brings, and obviously we're all working towards that one ultimate goal. So. I appreciate the question, but I'm not going to be entertaining this question all year. I understand why you guys want to talk about it, but at the same time, there's nothing that can be done. I'm under contract for 2 more years. I can't extend for another 10 months. So I'll just kind of leave it at that, but I appreciate the question.
So there's a couple things in there that I want to touch on. One, incredible self-awareness about the details of the inner workings of the CBA on his part to actually know that it's 10 months until the fact that he can sign. The fact is he's not obligated by any means to comment on the situation at all because, by CBA standards, he can say, I can't sign. There's no point in even talking about it. But also professing his love for the marketplace, which I think is important. Doesn't necessarily change anything one way or another, but addressing how the Toronto market has been for him. I think that might cool some fans on the urgency or the fear of him leaving, but I don't know. What do you think?
Well, when he signed that 5-year extension, Dave, a year or so ago, he knew damn well when that that signing period would happen. They know all of that. That's part of the business. And I know there's all sorts of talk, especially if you're from the greater Calgary area. Hey, look what happened to us. We lost our 2 stars, 2 Americans heading south to the States. Well, with all due respect to Calgary, it's a beautiful city, but it's not Toronto. When it comes to the hockey universe and the center thereof, if this sounds a little egomaniacal, then it is what it is. This is Toronto. It's not Calgary. It's not Edmonton. It's certainly not Winnipeg, and it's not Buffalo, and God help us, it's not Ottawa. This is the center of hockey in this country. And whether it be on the ice or off, I think it's to Auston's benefit to stay with this team, get an opportunity to continue to move forward and play with one of the premier right wingers on the planet. You're not going to get that necessarily in Los Angeles and many other rumored spots as to where Twitter has him going. He's in a great place right now. Why would you want to leave that, regardless of what side of the border you're on? I remember Mike Peck a few years ago when he was playing for Columbus, coming back to Toronto for a game with the Blue Jackets and just saying, down the hallway, just what a great organization Toronto was and the time that he had spent there. Nothing against Columbus, but it was just how good Toronto was to him, his family, and what it was like to play in Toronto. Dave, the Marlies have got better practice facilities than half the National Hockey League. It's a great organization. I'm not saying that because I covered the club for 25 years. It simply is what it is. And I think I just can't see him signing anywhere else when the dotted line's presented in front of him in less than a year's time. And he's just going to continue to prove himself. And when you look at contracts just signed in Colorado and what may be signed moving forward, he's going to get a big dollar, and the Leafs are going to give it to him. When Legends Row is redesigned in a couple of decades from now, Auston Matthews is going to be on it. And it's not because he played here for 7 seasons.
See, you sound pretty confident on it. I'm not as lock and key about it. All those points I do think is why he probably does stay. But I think number one to him actually comes down to the direction of the team. And a lot could happen this season. Like we've already touched on Kyle Dubas' future. It could be someone else in charge. There could be a situation where maybe he feels the window is peaked. When he signed that deal, it was so unique. And there was a lot of criticism to Dubas about that deal, not because of the dollar amount, but because of the term that it only bought 1 year of unrestricted free agency. And when you look now, you're either seeing shorter term deals outside of entry-level contracts, or what teams are now doing now is trying to get ahead of the depreciation years in the later part and give them the 8 years now so that you're paying them the most in their prime, when in their 30s they might start to regress. Like you're seeing that with Tim Stützle. You're seeing that with Buffalo, what they did with Tage Thompson, which is a little bit of a risk, but they're making a calculated one by making sure that if he trajects to the way they are, then that cap hit is desirable. Everything is there in terms of money management. The Leafs will have the space. There's no doubt in my mind about that. But I do think the direction of the team is key. If he doesn't feel like they're pushing to that next level, I've got to think at that point he might start looking at options outside of Toronto. But we'll see. It's still going to be very interesting. And he is the 2-time Rocket Richard winner, which is why I wanted to take a look at some odds from Bodog, our sponsor. From sports odds to free casino games, make a play at bodog.net. Of course, Auston Matthews, 60 goals, the first one to do it since Steven Stamkos in 10 years, plus 225. What say you, Henny? Does he actually get the Rocket Richard this year? And I'll go one further. Does he break 60?
That's a difficult question. I remember talking with Rick Vaive a couple of years ago when Auston was en route to breaking, his 54 goals in a season, and then pandemic hits, et cetera, and all that falls apart. I'm going to say he doesn't, but I'm going to say there's going to be a little more balance. 60, you've really got to be healthy. The entire year. And he wasn't last year.
Right.
The wrist problem. It's just tough. I mean, how many, 2 or 3 Leafs played all 82 games? Kerfoot, Riley, and maybe that's it. It's really difficult to play the majority of those games. You've got to be in the majority of those games to put up those kind of numbers. But he's got a shot at it. Without a doubt, he's got a shot at it. But, if I'm to put down a lot of my own personal capital, balance all things out, I still think he's going to have a hell of a year. I just don't necessarily know if it's going to be 60 again. And if it is going to be 60 again, come the dotted line time, 8 times 15, you insert your number as to whatever you want. But he'll be up and around that. Whether he's going to surpass that, I'd say no.
All right. Well, I think he'll win it again. 60 is going to be very difficult. It doesn't happen very often. I think he'll get close. I think there's going to be more of a priority on just expanding his two-way game, and that's going to be very difficult to do against someone like that. And then I also think that the division's a lot tougher this year with some of the improvements that have been made all around. You look at Matthew Tkachuk going to Florida. You look at the Ottawa Senators. They've always played the Leafs hard, and I expect the Battle of Ontario to be even stronger this year than it's ever been before. I'm really excited for those games. It's gonna be tough.
Hey, that team has to get a third defensive pairing. Let's be honest. I like their top 2 lines in Ottawa. I love their top defensive pairing, but it drops off after that in terms of balance. It's tough over the course of 82 games when you don't have a better defense. And I know at some point we're going to be able to maybe talk about Matt Murray and Ilya Samsonov. What Matt Murray is going to find out playing in Toronto is what Jack Campbell found out, an opportunity to resurrect your career with a better group in front of you over the course of 82 games, something Matt Murray did not have in Ottawa. They're going to be good. No question they're going to be good. I just don't think they have the depth that Toronto has to compete and maybe break into that top 3 of the Atlantic. But as you've mentioned, it's going to be tight. You've got Tampa, you've got Florida. There's going to be some drop-off from Boston, and then a bunch of those other teams were now starting to make gains, including the Buffalo Sabres. It's going to be a battle night in, night out.
And we're back. David Alter, Paul Hendrick with you on Rink Wide Toronto, sponsored by Bodog, sports odds, poker tips, and free casino games. It's time to play. All right, let's go back to Kyle Dubas' comments. Rasmus Sandin, that's been one of the tricky situations. He was one of a handful of RFAs around the league left. And, the first day of camp opens, and Rasmus Sandin is not on the training camp roster. And, we've seen how it can affect players who've gone through it before. And Kyle Dubas, explained how that could be damaging to the development of a particular player.
Well, we've been through it before. And, with a player that missed training camp and missed, 2 months of the season. And everyone in this room saw it. It's tough. And I think in Rasmus's case, he's a player that's still, he needs that. This is pivotal development time. So I think it is very important. And like I said at the outset, we certainly wish he was here because I do think it has massive value. And we hope that he's here as soon as possible.
So it's widely believed, Timothy Liljegren and Rasmus Sandin, according to the organization, they kind of wanted them to sign together. That's not unlike the Maple Leafs. Remember, Morgan Rielly and Nazem Kadri signed their previous deals on the same day at the end of the season. The Leafs have kind of done that. They offered him similar deals, and Liljegren said yes. Rasmus Sandin obviously said no. What do you make of that? Like, there's a really fine line between what the player feels he's worth and what the team not only feels he has worth, but also how much space they have for someone like him.
You're right. And from the player's perspective, wanting more playing time and maybe thinking he might not get it in Toronto, but he's going to get it in Toronto, Dave. The Leafs used 11 defensemen to get through last season. You look at the left side as it currently stands, Morgan Rielly, Jake Muzzin, Mark Giordano. The latter two, rather older, injury prone, especially when it comes to Jake Muzzin. I don't think there is a problem with Rasmus getting his playing time. Now, this is also a situation where the club has leverage, and they're going to use this leverage, especially when they're $1.05 over the cap as it stands right now. There are going to have to be decisions made. Now, things get a little easier in that regard when Timothy Liljegren is going to be out for at least a couple of months because of hernia surgery. It also provides a little more leverage now in the camp of Rasmus Sandin and putting a little more pressure on the Maple Leafs to get something done. But I think they've got an idea as to what they want to pay him, and they're going to stick to those boundaries. And what Kyle was talking about, obviously, was William Nylander and the fact that he missed all that camp. Well, he missed all of camp, half the season, and he never got off the ground that season and was able to bounce back a year later, 30-plus goals, and away we go. There's only been one player in terms of missing an entire camp to come back and hit the ice in stride. That was Mario Lemieux. Rasmus Sandin is not of that ilk, with all due respect to his young talent. He cannot afford to miss any time because he'll never get caught up. And so get the deal done and move on with it. I tweeted earlier today, a case in point, Anton Stralman, 2009, played the identical number of games that Rasmus has played, 88 games with the Leafs, between hops, between the Marlies, back up with the big club, and they let him go. I know he had an asthma situation, but that got rectified. But what happened was Anton goes on to play 13 more years and plays on Ranger and Lightning teams in back-to-back years that go to the Stanley Cup, and he's in their top four. He's a pivotal player. So, I mean, I don't know if Rasmus is going to be as good as Anton was, but he's going to be good. And you just do not give up on young talent like this because of a few $100,000 as to which way it's going to go. Get it done, Toronto Maple Leafs, and Rasmus and your agent, come to your senses. Get this thing signed for the benefit of both parties.
Well, yeah, I mean, like, it really does seem like at this point, whether it's term or just hundreds of thousands of dollars in this case, it's probably, it might be in the seven figures difference, but it's very minute. I wrote about this in the summer because it almost seemed like every day Rasmus Sandin was trending on Twitter. If Alex Kerfoot wasn't, and that's a conversation for another episode. Yeah, it seemed like one of those things where, you know, people were kind of putting the heat on him to just accept what he accepted. And I talked to teams around the league and other agents, and, you know, the sense I got is the Leafs can be over the cap until the day before the start of the season. Anything can happen between now and then. Yes, they're over the cap right now, but a lot of things can happen, whether it's injuries before camp, like we just saw with, as you mentioned, Liljegren, but not just him, the $2.25 million Pierre Engvall, who's got an ankle injury and will have to be reassessed just before the season begins. So if that is long-term, that's a little bit more space. That allows them to move things around. And listen, everyone was already talking about the cap dilemma with just 20 players around. Well, what happened in the last preseason game last year? Ilya Mikheyev broke his hand, and then he was out for 2 months, and the Leafs didn't have any sort of roster limitation in terms of what they could carry. So I'm not surprised that it got to this point. I think these injuries have sped things along, and talks are continuing, and I wouldn't be surprised if this gets hammered home in the next couple of days in some sort of 1 year really short-term compromise, or maybe 2 years. It's somewhere slightly better than what was offered or something. I don't fault a player for trying to better their situation and not necessarily just take what the team can give you, because in that weird situation with no arbitration coming out of an entry-level contract, there really is no leverage. This is really all you can do. So there is that. And so let's talk about the injuries, since it's a nice little pivot, because it does affect what the Leafs do without Sandin and without Pierre Engvall there. There's a couple of competitions for spots now. You know, there's a lot of newcomers on the Leafs there in the depth forwards. Who among some of the newcomers do you think will kind of push into that bottom six that really does now seem to be wide open there?
Well, the addition of a couple of players, and, you know, Nicholas Aube-Kubel and Zach Aston Reese, these are a couple of guys who like to put some pressure and body on. Kubel, of course, brings Stanley Cup pedigree with his time with Colorado, and Zach Aston Reese with all his time spent in Pittsburgh, playing alongside some really good players. But those are two guys who I can see impacting the bottom six maybe at times filtering into the second line somewhere, depending on the injury situation. But I think they've got a possibility of really helping out. And if I'm Wayne Simmons or if I'm Kyle Clifford, I might be, especially Simmons, I might be looking over my shoulder. I'd better be having a hell of a training camp. Otherwise, this could be money that could be shifted off toward the Marlies. I think both of those players are very close to being at the end. And I think Kubel and Reese have an opportunity to make an impact in that regard and maybe displace a couple of these guys. I mean, a possible scenario that we don't see, a scenario that might see, Clifford going down to the Marlies and filling a spot like Rich Clune once did in terms of the veteran experience, making a good paycheck, obviously, but getting called up depending on the Leafs situation as to where they're playing, who they might be playing, and maybe needing that kind of muscle. But I think, again, Kubel and Reese, I think they're going to make an impact with this hockey club, much like Bunting did with the Leafs last season, maybe not to that extent, but certainly benefiting the bottom six at a much lower pay rate than a bunch of the guys in that top six are making. And Bunting's another guy who bet on himself last year, and his $950,000 getting to play with those two guys yet again is going to be a big, big pay raise come the end of next season. And like Hyman and a few others, at least might not be able to afford him, but at least they've got him at a bargain rate, and that goes for Kubel and Auston Reese this time around as well, Dave.
And I'm going to add Calle Jarnkrok to that list as well, because I think, given the term that they gave him for his age, I think that was the Leafs admitting that there is a serious hole in terms of toughness combined with skill that was missing on that bottom six. Not that they don't have enough, but if you go back and watch that Tampa series, the one place where they were completely outplayed was that last line. That fourth line torched the Maple Leafs. And I think that kind of gave the Leafs a little bit of awareness that they need to add some skilled toughness, some disturbers. We haven't put a rating on this podcast yet, so I'll play it safe for now. It's one of those things where come playoff time, they really needed those people that can make sure they're not burned in that aspect, because offense is everything. And in the regular season, it takes you far. Look at the Florida Panthers. It took them really far till it didn't in the second round, right? So I think that picking up someone like him, I think, was the real key. With Calgary, it didn't quite work out to the point where they thought it would, but they miscast him in a center. I think the Leafs do try him out as a winger because they like Kampf in that spot. They have other fourth line guys who can fill that center spot, and Jarnkrok can kind of add to that mid to bottom six kind of spot.
Yeah, he could also play up, depending on what they want to do with Alex Kerfoot, who's so versatile as well, and he can bounce around and be effective. And for Calle, 30 years of age, 4-year contract, a little better than $2 million per season. It's a nice investment for the club. But a very economical investment for the club, and a guy who can play all up and down the lineup like he's going to do, and Alex Kerfoot is going to do. Alex is at $3.5 million, certainly a little more expensive. He's a UFA at the end of this year. I don't see him going anywhere because he just fills so many holes depending on where the team is at during the season health-wise. Right now, the consensus second line left winger, but we'll see. But Jarnkrok could easily play up there. So, I mentioned Kubel and Reese a little lower down in terms of line play, but Jarnkrok, of course, a major signing. So you can lump him in with those other two guys to really help things out as this club moves forward and helps a liaison as to when the game progresses and moves on to the top two lines and what they want to do. Those third and fourth lines could be very effective with some goal scoring output, of course, but more so physically, I think.
We're going to wrap this up with one more topic, which many might think is going to be the number one topic as the season moves along. And of course, that is goaltending. Of course, Jack, and you mentioned it off the top, Jack Campbell is out. So is Peter Mrazek. In is Matt Murray via trade from the Ottawa Senators with 25% salary retained by the Sens, and a 1-year gamble at $1.8 million on Ilya Samsonov. When I looked at this initially, I kind of rolled my eyes initially at the Matt Murray thing, but I got it. I understood it a little bit. And then it made more sense when they were able to get Samsonov. It almost seemed like they have more clarity in their depth of goaltending than they did last year, but their starter is lacking clarity than it did last year. It's weird. Like, I feel better about the team's depth than I do about their starter in that position. What say you about that?
I agree, because I'm not quite sure who the starter is going to be. Both these guys are going to get a legitimate opportunity to fight for that top job. Both have played with really good hockey teams in the past, not including the Ottawa Senators. With all due respect to Sens Nation, the Matt Murray era there was not a good one. He was hurt. Things were just not right. And the club, let's be honest, just not good enough. That's going to change this time around. Samsonov with a Washington team that's getting older, very older. They're going to start the year banged up. I think Ilya likes his position here with the Maple Leafs, knowing he gets a chance to compete. And Sheldon talked about in today's press conference, they open up with back-to-back games against Montreal and Washington. There's going to be enough of these scenarios that both goaltenders are going to get a chance to show what they can do. But these are two athletes, Dave, that have something to prove. I think it's really, really important. And in Matt Murray's case, he's won a couple of Stanley Cups, finally healthy, hopefully able to stay healthy. But if not, I don't think there's any worry about Samsonov coming in to get the job done. It's Frederik Andersen when he was here, even though he was the consensus starter, I don't know how much confidence or faith Leafs Nation may have had on him, because mentally he had his ups and downs in terms of dealing with setbacks on the ice, and it didn't always result well. And we know what he did in a couple of Game 7s in Boston. Didn't play well at all and did not give his team an opportunity to win tough games on the road. Matt Murray's been there before, and we'll see what Ilya Samsonov. Ilya's what, like 20? I have to look it up. He's 28 years old, 26 years old.
25. He's under the age 20. Of UFA eligibility, because they got him a couple of days after he was not tendered a qualifying offer, because, of course, everyone's cap is shorter. So that's how the Leafs have been able to get a lot of guys over the last couple of years that are a bit younger, willing to take that bet on themselves. And not only that,
Murray's 28. Yeah.
Yeah. So
they're young.
Yeah, they're very young. They're very young, but like, here's the thing about this. Mm-hmm. So, I like goaltending. I used to play goalie when I was a kid. I like looking at things through that lens. And while the Leafs had a lot of offense and they put different goaltenders in that spot, you're right. When the playoffs came, those are the moments that you need to really stand out, right? And that's why there's very few goaltenders that teams are willing to make the big money long-term bet that this is our guy. Like Tampa has it with Andrei Vasilevsky, because there's no question. Like you even saw it, even though the save percentage wasn't necessarily great in that opening series, when he needed to make the saves to keep his team in it, he did. Mm-hmm. Where, against Montreal, granted it was Jack Campbell's first playoff series, but there were a couple of soft goals. It didn't augur a lot of confidence that he said that he was pretty emotional and saying the worst goal of my career and was in the playoffs. And he had some good money.
Game 7.
Yeah, and that's you feel bad for the guy, but it's a results-based business, and goaltending is such a finicky spot. And the one place the Leafs haven't been able to get that type of goaltending is the playoffs. So while Matt Murray is a gamble, and I was kind of shaking my head at it a little bit at first, as they got Samsonov and as they started to add in other places, I thought to myself, even if Murray takes 5 months to get his game and Samsonov or whoever it is gets the first game of the playoffs and it's not working out and they need to throw Matt Murray in there, there is that comfort that he's done it before. And you saw it with all these offseason acquisitions. Everyone that they've got has got playoff experience. I think that's not a coincidence, and I think that's really the play here. That combined with the fact that there's not a lot of term, and they have to think about the cap long-term for some things that we've talked about, like Auston Matthews. So I'm warming up to it a bit. There's no question that this team is a playoff team. If goaltending starts to be the reason that they're struggling off the hop, then it's a problem. Then we're talking about it every day.
Yeah, I read a stat that since the cap system was put into place, of the last 25 or 26 Stanley Cups, 18 of the goaltenders who won those Stanley Cups are not going to the Hall of Fame. So 7 or 8 are legitimate Hall of Famers, and I'd put Vasilevsky in that category as well. But the rest, like the Mike Vernons, I can go on and on, are not. Darcy Kemper, he's not going to the Hall of Fame.
Right.
So a lot of what's going on, of course, you've got to be good. You've got to provide really decent goaltending. But if there is enough support and talent up front and balance, you've got a chance to win a Stanley Cup. Is it with Samsonov and Murray? Time remains to be told in that regard. But I don't think you need the second coming of Johnny Bower or Turk Broda to win the Stanley Cup. Carey Price would be good at a nice price tag and healthy, but that just isn't the case anymore. And so it could be the Darcy Kempers of this world moving forward for most teams, because most teams do not have a Hall of Fame goaltender in nets. That's it, simply.
And I'll add one more stat to you. I don't have it offhand, but the Leafs had one of the worst goaltending save percentages in the league last year, and they still managed to finish where they finished in the standings. And those were some awkward months. I remember being in Detroit for that. Was it 10-8? I don't even remember what the final score was, but it was insane. I never saw a goalie leave a game. A goalie was pulled in a winning situation because of how quick the goals were being scored on him. It was unbelievable. And the Leafs had the firepower to withstand that, but I don't know with how competitive this league is, if that's going to be the same. And that's really the only concern going into this year. But Henny, there's going to be a lot to talk about this season. I'm looking forward to doing it with you. Thank you so much for jumping on today.
My apologies to Calgary, Winnipeg, Buffalo, and Ottawa. All great places, but for different reasons.
All right. Thank you, Paul. That's going to do it for the first episode. Really excited to be back on board. We're going to be providing you podcasts for every post-game show as well as pre-game. We're going to be all over the place. The next episode will be Saturday at the tail end of the doubleheader. Again, this is going to be a lot of fun to do. Make sure you subscribe to Rink Wide Toronto on all your favorite podcast platforms. This has been Rink Wide Toronto, sponsored by Bodog.